Alright, Gabriel here with the final Uncommon Draft tier list. Melting Remnant edition. And, yeah, let's get it. I will say, they're decent. They're very good, actually. Well, many of them are very good. Some of them suck. One is potentially, candidate for worst card in the game. But, make your guesses on which one I think that is. A hint. It has the best animation in the game, if that didn't give it away. You probably haven't watched me play much Melting Remnant if you don't know what card I'm talking about, but we'll get to it. I do think it's one of the better uncommon pools, though. The only knock against it, I guess I would say, is that there's not really any offensive scaling, unless you want to count Wicked Blaze, which I guess you could. Everything else is all tertiary, right? There's defensive scaling with Engulfed in Smoke, and then there's like tertiary scaling with Harvest/Reform stuff. That's it, though. So that's the only knock against it, but otherwise I think it's a pretty solid pool. You're often finding something at the Melting Uncommon drafts that you can add to a deck, and have it be pretty impactful. So the first one we got here is a Fatal Melting. I am putting it at A tier. This is definitely one that I didn't rate very highly pre-DLC. It was like a disgruntled take a lot of the time. It's like, I need flat AoE. I'll take a really bad flat AoE option, right? It's not so bad anymore in a world where flat AoE is just such a godsend, right? Also in a world where plus 10 in piercing, or even the plus 30 damage upgrade, maybe even both, make these flat AoE cards just so worth it, even at 2 Ember. I do find the actual sacrificing portion of it pretty weak. It doesn't give you a whole lot of damage per Is that too loud, or is that just me? Maybe I just have my headphones up too loud. Oh, anyway, here's Wonderwall. Let me just turn my headphones down. And, anyway, so Fatal Melting, yeah, I don't know. The actual card text is weak. The cost is not great. It's kind of like Ancient, Synergy, right? Is that the name? The Wormkin card? It's 2 cost flat AoE that has an effect. It basically does 0 damage baseline, but has an effect that goes up in damage. I find, though, that Ancient Synergy is a bit better. Even though I think that was in my A tier of Wormkin cards, it's at a little bit higher on the notch of A tier than Fatal Melting is in comparison. But in, the context of if you have a few units die, you have a piercing upgrade on it, it's doing about the same that Ancient Synergy will do, so I think they actually end up being pretty similar in value. Just, I'd rather have an Ancient Synergy if I had a choice between the two, which you'll never have. You'll never have a choice between these two, right? The drafts are always contained within the clans. It's not like the rare drafts, which actually mix clans, right? But yeah, I don't really know what more to say. It's the only spell that gives you flat AoE for Melting, so it also gets a bump there. For Melting. Did I say Melting Remnant? Well, I meant Melting Remnant. Whatever I said, I meant Melting Remnant. But yeah, that's Fatal Melting. Next card, real banger, Crushing Demise. No surprise to be in the S tier. What a just bustedly good card. You could probably nerf this to a 2 cost and it's still S tier. It probably should be nerfed to a 3 cost, in all honesty. It's pretty ridiculous. I will also say these 2 cards combo amazingly. If you really want to focus in on a tank, play Fatal Melting first, kill all the squishies, and then get guaranteed huge value out of your Crushing Demise. Obviously, the best use of it is to kill the divine mini-bosses, right? They actually, back when they cared about updating the game, they were going to change that so that it didn't kill the mini-bosses, but I guess they abandoned that. And, I'm fine with that. It feels good to be able to kill them with Crushing Demise, though if the game had a more competitive scene, perhaps, I could see definitely it making sense that they removed that. It is pretty busted to just be able to delete one of these mini bosses like that. Definitely feels good though. But yeah, it's just like, and sometimes killing your own unit is needed. Like, I definitely love this if I'm running like Legion of Waxes, for example, because I want to clear out my Waxes most of the time. My Waxi. And, back in the day, I don't really do this anymore, but when I would do Rapid Reform, it's the best card for Rapid Reform. Like, you kill an enemy unit, you kill one of your own units, you reform it. It's amazing for that, but it is rarely that I'm doing that anymore. It's also worth noting, if you can get like an early Hell Vent on, or early holdover on a Crushing Demise, you can Hell Vent that sucker like 3 times, and depending on your setup, you can basically just use any banner unit in the game, and if you have like Dark Calling, and you can have Dark Calling survive on its own floor, with some, you know, maybe some stealth or some dazed, for the Divinity. Every other fight it won't matter, but for Divinity you'll need that to have it survive on its own floor. But you can have basically, you play your units, you kill all the units with Crushing Demise, the several Crushing Demises that you have, and then you just keep scaling them back with Dark Calling, whatever unit you have. It doesn't matter what unit you have at that point. It could literally be a Train Steward and it will get huge. Just a fun little use of it. But yeah, the floor is high, the ceiling's high, one of the best cards in the game. You could argue Crushing Demise for best card in the game, and I wouldn't argue with you. The next card, also very, very good. Engulfed in Smoke, one of the best defensive cards in the game. Way back in the day when Melting Remnant sucked, Engulfed in Smoke was like a shining beacon of greatness. It used to be 1 Ember, if you could believe it or not. And double stack used to not increase Ember. So you could literally put double stack and have 1 cost Engulfed in Smokes. So, one of the few cards that has been nerfed in Melting Remnant since around that time. Most of the other stuff has been buffed to get to the point that we're at now. But yeah, Engulfed in Smoke is still amazing at 2 cost. It's a great permafrost target. It's a great double stack target. It's a great holdover target. Literally anything, almost, you're basically guaranteed at any Merchant of Magic to have something. Factoring in a reroll, of course. You'll have something that's amazing for this. It, honestly, you could probably argue best card. I don't know that I could give it to Engulfed, though, but it's just a very solid card. One of the best defensive cards in the game. Sometimes it can be awkward with, like, a Dark Calling deck, because the stealth timers get wonky and offset. It can also be wonky with, burnout, timers in general. You know, if you just don't have much burnout extension and you do have stuff that burns out, it's definitely a little awkward sometimes there. It's awkward with morsels, too, a lot of the time. Only unawkward if you have it on holdover, I guess, in those cases. But, like, a double-stacked one in that case can make it awkward. I guess what I find with Engulfed in Smoke is, like, Molten Encasement, even though they're about the same in what they do on paper, in practice, it's a bit different. Like, often if I'm running Molten Encasement, my floor is very rarely ephemeral, if that makes sense. Like, it's often just a floor that... Because you'll find Molten Encasement before you find Engulfed in Smoke, so you usually commit to a floor that's just not going to be ephemeral. And by ephemeral, I mean it's like temporal in time, aka burnout or whatnot. You know, stuff that burns out and has to come back, or otherwise dies and has to come back. So with Engulfed in Smoke, you're often taking it if you didn't find Molten Encasement. And also, by the point in the game you find Engulfed in Smoke, you probably may have committed to some sort of line that might not play so nicely with Engulfed in Smoke. So that's the only real knock I can give against it. It does make it so it ends up not making it into a lot of my decks, though. I'd say of my S tier cards, it's actually got not that high of a pick rate, but I do think it's just a very, very, very good card. You can probably pick it in almost every case, and it won't be bad for you. Very, very good card. But yeah, like for instance, let's put it this way. Like, say I had a Lady of the Reformed and it was central to my strategy. I probably can't take Engulfed in Smoke at that point, right? Unless I can put like a Flash Freeze or a Fracture onto my Lady of the House to ensure that it's getting damaged. Like, I just can't do Engulfed in Smoke in that case. Well, we got a lot of the good ones out of the way. If you guessed the card that I think could be the worst card in the game, yeah, it's Memento Mori. Has to be my most removed card in the game. It is so bad. Like, it's so bad. Best animation in the game, hands down. So sad. Oh, how I would love if they made this card not awful. It might be worse than Emberforge, because at least in Emberforge I can play and have it die, and then it doesn't recycle through the deck on redraw. This card begs a removal because it is so bad, and it's a spell. It can be included in your opener, since it's uncommon. Why does it cost 3? Why? Even at a 1 cost, I wouldn't take this that much. I mean, even at a 1 cost, it's... Let's put it this way. How often do you just add, say, an Entombed Explosive to your deck? Something that does 50 damage baseline. You gotta have 5 deaths to even get it to that damage. So even if it costs 1, at least early on, it's not even doing what an Entombed Explosive does. And it doesn't have the chance to have Double Exploder, or the same type of Harvest synergy, the chump blocking, the way around Ember Drain, the potential for double extinguish. None of these exist with Memento Mori. I guess you could argue spell weakness if you're with Stygian, but I wouldn't. It's just the worst card. It's probably not the worst card in the game, but I think the fact that they spent such a great deal making literally the best animation in this game, hands down, and wrapped it into this card might, on principle, make it the worst card in the game. Because on a Blue Moon, maybe I have a Split Anvil and I just use it for a shitty amount of damage as Split Anvil activator, and it actually makes sense in that case. So facetiously, practically, literally, whatever word you want to use, it's probably not the worst. But again, on principle, it's the worst. I hate this card more than any other card in the game, and I hate seeing it. Speaking of other cards I've hated and I've always hated, because I've always hated Memento Mori, and I've always hated this. I hate it less than the DLC, believe it or not. Memories of the Melted. It can make sense in some decks. It can make sense in an incant deck. 0 cost, target list. Incant that could get you energy, maybe. A lot of times it won't. Basically every card in the Melting Remnant that has all these spells that have like these effects that trigger off friendly unit deaths just suck, other than Fatal Melting. But the only reason Fatal Melting is good, again, is not because of the effect. It's good because I can slap a +10 or a +30 and I get that flat across the board. And Pierce. And that flat AoE ends up being useful. This card is only good as a happenstance of what Divinity is, Because of what Divinity waves are, this card becomes good. That's the only reason it's good. In a vacuum, Fatal Melting sucks. Now, in a vacuum and in happenstance and everything, Memento Mori and Memories of the Melted just suck. There are high rolls for Memories of the Melted, though, unlike Memento Mori. Like, the high roll of Memento Mori is what? You do 100 or more damage. I can already do that with, like, every other front-loaded 3-cost spell in the game. Like, think of, like, the requirement for Ancient Synergy to do 100 damage. That's real easy to hit, right? Just have spells in your deck, in a Stygian deck. But yeah, I don't know. Memories of the Melted is just so bad. Like, it's not a high priority removal, I guess, is what I'll give it that, since it consumes. You don't have to see it on redraw. It's easy to play, so it has that going for it. But It's just one of the most non-impactful cards in the game. Every now and then you can combine it. Like, I've had, like, some repeater decks where I combine that with, I'm trying to think. I don't think I've actually done that. I'm lying. I'm just bold-faced lying. I have never done that with repeater. What am I saying? Because it makes no sense with repeater, right? There's nothing in that combo that benefits from that. They have 2 shitty spikes. I guess you could do it with the Wormkin spike to clear out floors. Not that good, though. I think your average repeater can find better shit than that. I guess you could do it with Wax and Spike to get damage to your floor. Theoretically, that exists. Never done it in practice. If I have, I can't remember when I did it. I don't know. It's like, yeah, there's probably situations where it could be okay. Maybe it's a way out of Ember Drain every now and then, but I just think it's horrible. I think it's a really, really bad card that I never... I have added it to decks, but it's so rare. I don't think I've actually added Memento Mori to a deck since the DLC dropped. I don't think I've ever actually clicked the take button. If you can find one of my videos that proves otherwise, feel free, but I don't think I've actually taken it. I've taken Memories of the Melted. There's the rare time it makes sense. I can't tell you when it makes... I'm trying to come up with reasons for it to make sense, other than like an incant deck, and I'm struggling, or like a way out of Ember Drain. I'm struggling, but clearly there are reasons, because I do remember taking the card here and there. I'll tell you what, though, it's just one of the most usually not worth including decks cards. Not... What the hell phrase am I even trying to say right now? It's one of the most not worthy of being included in a deck cards in the game. How about that? Say that 20 times fast. Moto Entrapment. Now here's a card where I hated it pre-DLC. This was like almost Memento Mori level hate for me because it was so overcosted. I mean, it's still overcosted. It used to not be attuned. I don't think adding attuned did literally anything to help this card. I don't know what the thought there was. You could take away the damage component, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do, which is the daze. You only take this for the daze. I've never taken it for the spell damage component. All that being said, does it surprise you that it's in my A tier? It surprised me, because I was going to say B or C, but as I do with these, I always check my data. This is one of my most taken cards, actually, of the Melting Remnant Uncommon pool. And it started to make sense. I mean, it is such a nice answer to the DLC world. You know, it's a hard counter to Patient. It's a hard counter to top 4 Divinity. It's a great option to deal with all of the awful sharded up bosses like Multi-Striker boss. Now again, true, sometimes you just have stealth. Stealth trumps this and you don't need it, but there's a lot of runs where you don't have stealth, and this is an amazing card, actually, in those cases. Yes, the requirement of them being damaged sucks. Yes, it's way overcosted at 30. They're at 3 Ember. Doesn't matter, 3 dazed is 3 dazed, and 3 dazed is a god. You can put 3 dazed on any card, and it doesn't matter how bad that card is, it's a very good card in the Divinity world. And trust me, everything else on this card sucks. The 3 cost, the needing of the enemy to be dazed, or damaged, all those things suck. Does not... honestly, all that does is keeps it out of the S tier. Those really bad card text and card stat things. That just keeps it out of the S tier. It'd be S tier otherwise. And honestly, if it's just a 3 cost, take away the damage, if it's just 3 cost, apply daze 3 without the requirement of the enemy being damaged, I think this would be an S tier card. But I tell you what, I hated the card before. I actually like it now. I don't like the attuned thing. I think they can just get rid of that. I like the requirement, because it's still, as you can see, a very powerful card, and I like that some cards just are a little bit shittier than the others, but still very useful. So I actually like the design of Moto Entrapment now, believe it or not. One of the most 180 cards I've done is probably Moto Entrapment. I wouldn't say I love it, but I sure do like it. and it often is a godsend to so many decks. Like I said, you don't always have stealth, and this is one of the best dazing application cards in the game. As Hart said, and I 100% agree with, Daze is the most powerful debuff in the Divine World. Now we get to a card that is the opposite of Moto Entrapment. This is a card I loved pre-DLC. I don't really take it at all post-DLC. Remnant Host. It's one of the better harvest cards in the game, but I just don't go harvest anymore. You know, Big Sludge is a rare. You don't find it that often. I will say, even though Big Sludge went down as a unit in the DLC, it's still a usable unit. I've definitely won with Big Sludge a few times, and it was strong. Also, the infusion is probably... The essence is generally better than using it as a unit. Not always, but generally. And in those cases, Remnant Host is one of the best things you can find. It's still good for those, but it's so rare that comes up. And Wickless Baron, it's a very good unit, but I much prefer going a Paraffin Enforcer route. I would prefer going a, on the subject of rares, I'd rather go, if I had my choice between the three rares, I'd choose Legion or Bounty Stalker over Big Sludge every time. So even between the rares, Harvest doesn't win out. All that being said, I choose Wickless Baron a fair amount of times still, yet I still don't take this card. It's hard to really say why. I guess it's only purely there for the harvest. You know, it's in the new world, those drafts are never going to get their damage off, so it's just there for harvest fodder. In the Divine World, like I said, you're never getting those drafts off. If you have a combustible wax, I'd argue it's even like completely untakeable. If I'm gonna take a tomb, I would prefer the common tombs. Definitely Molten Encasement, no brainer. It's preferable to this. Even the Entombed Explosive, I think, is preferable typically, even in a harvest deck. At least I get that damage off. I'd prefer the damage over the extra harvests. I still take it from time to time. It's not D tier, and the unit in a vacuum is good. Like I said, really good for harvest fodder, but I just don't think there's enough harvest in the game. Realistically and practically, Wickless Baron's the only thing I'd focus harvest toward. Even though I would take the harvest variant of Rector a lot of the time, especially with Dark Calling if it's offered, I would never just take a Remnant Host to try to feed my harvest portion of Rector. That's just not worth it to me. I'd almost argue the same for Wickless Baron. It's like, I can make Wickless Baron work decently, but Remnant Host, you could say it's a little win more. Like, it's only there to scale out the Wickless Baron. It doesn't help with dealing with the wave directly. And it can be a liability. Like, sometimes with the way stealth triggers, you might just get those drafts stealthed. And if you have, say, combustible wax, like I said, they'll sit on the floor, and now you can't even play anything on the floor now. Also, it's worth noting that, true, I can play multiple tombs on a floor, but often I don't have the pip to do that. I'm using my pip usually already fully by the point I would find a Remnant Host. Either with other tombs that are better, like I said, or just banners that are already filling up the floor. And there's just very rare times I choose Remnant Host. So, I don't know. It's a unit that is probably good if you do Melting Remnant in a way that utilizes it more. Like, it's definitely not a bad card, but my pick rate's incredibly low. Like, it's right there with the D tiers. So I can't give it anything higher than a C, even though it's technically a good card. I just have no reason to add it to my decks. Now, on the flip side again, here's a card I am adamant that I never liked it pre-DLC. I know a lot of people did. I don't think you can convince me of it. I think it was pretty worthless pre-DLC, Resin Removal. It became a little more useful when they added Patient, but still, I think debuff removal, that portion of it was pretty unnecessary pre-DLC. Now, though, I think it's an A tier card. It's very, very takeable. There's so many fucking enemy buffs in the DLC world. Everybody and their mother has spikes and spell shield in the divinity fight. Sometimes they have damage shield even, that first wave. Also, it's just nice to have for some of the shard effects on the bosses, say like divinity. That stealth is bullshit. Just remove that is great. Same with 2 of the Arcus variants. Sin of Shadow gets a ton of stealth. Sin of Darkness gets a bit of stealth. A bit of honey. Great for removing that. You want to get those damages in whenever the flying boss gets to your floor. Not doing that is equivalent. It's kind of equivalent to dazing them if you think about it. It's like that. It's just that many extra rounds of damage you get in while they are not attacking you. And for the actual removal of your own debuffs, I think it's still about the same as it was pre-DLC. I don't think that portion is that useful. Melee weakness, it's fine. It can be pretty good with Umbra for Ember Drain removal. Outside of that, are you really getting debuffed that much? Maybe some sap. The sap it's like nice to remove the sap, I guess, on Sap Seraph. But it's not that necessary. And yeah, just like pre-DLC to post-DLC, you can hard counter the stealth boss. I really don't find I ever, with Melting Remnant need that. With all the dazed, with all the chunk blocking, with all the reform, with all the stealth, why would I ever need that? It's funny to do. I mean, I do it. If it's there, I'll do it, but nah, you don't need that. I think a lot of other clans would benefit from this a lot more, honestly. Umbra in particular would love it. But, for the record, A tier. It's still just incredibly takeable. One of the most, again, like Moto Entrapment, probably a card that was in both cards are probably in my D tier, pre-DLC. Now they're in my A tier. I almost thought about putting Resin in S, honestly, just in terms of takeability, but I do find a lot of times I take it and it doesn't end up being that impactful on a run. Even removing a bunch of spell shield or spikes is often actually not that needed. Like I can remove the spikes with any sort of removal, which I would want anyway. And if I have any piercing or just good units, the spell shield doesn't matter. So it is often non-impactful, I will say that. I could actually be convinced that Resin Removal is B tier. I will say the win rate, it's my pick rate is high with it, but my win rate is actually not that good. It has a negative effect on my win rate by like a pretty good margin. So like this is one of those where the rare ones where I rate it high that I could actually be convinced it's worse than I'm rating it. I could see this being actually a B tier card, Resin Removal. But I'm going to chalk up the loss rate to variance. We'll just say that. If I continue to pick it at a high rate and it just continues to have a negative effect on my win rate, I might lower it. Then we got Sacred Wicks. It's just a middle of the road card. Always has been, always will be. I think the problem with this card is you don't really need it with Primitive Mold, because you already have Random Reform and a 1-time 0 cost 2. It's okay. It's probably at its best with a Permafrost in that case, but just to get a big army together for the Relentless rounds. But it's like the variant that would want it more is the Dreg variant, but by just default, Dregs make this card suck because you want to play your Dregs out. Like one of the only advantages of Dregs is that they're a 0 cost unit that basically consumes. But then this card, which gives you the reform that you're dying to want, usually with Dreg variant, now makes it so you can't play Dregs if you actually want to use Sacred Wicks to its full potential. So I could never say it's a great card. I do think, though, that just at a value and takeability stance, it's decent. 0 cost, reform 2, random. Definitely worth it to include in a lot of decks. Unlike Memories of the Melted, it just usually does something for you, right? At no cost. Other than the fact that you had to include it in your deck, of course. Now here's a card, I put this in probably my A or S tier pre-DLC. I think it's fallen to B tier for me, Subsuming Blade. Yes, I know it's a word. I know it fits the card. I'm just a bastard. What can I say? It's just overcaught. You know, I don't know. It could still be A tier. I could be convinced that it's A tier, but my take rate isn't that high with it, so clearly it just doesn't make sense in a lot of my decks, just at a base level. Whereas, like, pre-DLC, I would be chomping at the bit to add this card to my decks, right? It's targeted removal. I'd usually use it on my own units mainly, but now that sacrificing your own units is so much less of a thing, it's only really useful for killing enemies. I mean, I still take it for self-sack here and there. Like, it's still takeable. It's overcosted, but unlike an overcosted card like Fatal Melting, it doesn't provide the same benefit of just that flat AoE damage. It's single target damage that needs some setup. It needs Ember upgrades, which is easy enough to get, but it's, you know, a 25 Ember upgrade, 25 gold Ember upgrade isn't just a 25 gold Ember upgrade, right? You only have so many magics, merchant magics you can visit on a run, and so many cards that you can dedicate that cost reduction to. So it's like, this card basically requires it, I would almost say, in order to be usable. Like, at 2 cost, it's just not worth it. At a 1 cost, it's fine. 1 cost holdover, all the better. Or 0 cost. So it needs cost reduction. That's already a knock against it. It needs time to grow. It's another knock against it. And it just affects 1 unit, which is a knock against it. But all these things being said, it's not a bad card by any means. Like I said, I could be convinced it's better than I'm rating it here, but with how low my take rate was, like, I take it less than Sacred Wicks. I can't give it higher than a B just with how little I've taken it in the DLC. For whatever reason, and I can't even really articulate. I'd be lying if I had a good, solid understanding of why I don't take it that much anymore. Like, I tried to think about it, and I didn't have great reasons, because, like, in concept, it still seems like it should be good, right? Piercing is super valuable in the DLC world, and backliners have a ton of health now. So, like, everything seems like Subsuming Blade should be good. Even better in the DLC, right? But I think the fact that Burnout Extension became the king to me in the DLC, or just otherwise keeping units on a floor, and even if you're not stacking Burnout, stacking Stealth. So, like, self-sack just went right out the door. I think that's the biggest thing that made Subsuming Blade less valuable to me. It's just the self-sack component became so much less of a need. So maybe if that becomes more of a thing, the problem is, like, I just find Divinity. You could probably check out my curse seed from yesterday, or I don't know when this video will come out, but maybe 2 days ago. Check out the one titled fuck it. Just take my word on it. Doing a rapid reform strategy is so hard on Divinity. Like, it's so hard to line up those burnout timers and health on your units to actually get a good relentless round. Because remember, before Divinity was a thing, rapid reform was so powerful because you could basically set up bottom floor, keep dying and reforming. Your natural burnout timer would be increasing, and then every flying boss, you could fight them on all 3 floors doing that. So, like, if you didn't kill them on bottom floor, you have your holdover molded or permafrosted molded or whatever, and then the next floor you just play them again. And usually you'd kill them by then, but even if you didn't kill them by then, you have another whole floor to play them on again. So that's 3 entire floors that you get to fight with your units on. So, like, the rapid reform was so nice, but you can't do that with Divinity. You only get one relentless round against Divinity, and often you just don't have the burnout to do it, especially if you didn't add extra burnout extension. So, I don't know. I think all of that considered is probably why Subsuming Blade doesn't get picked very much for me anymore. But I could be convinced otherwise. And then Retivary, it's another card that's probably better than I'm giving it credit for, but I hardly ever take it. And I don't know. It can be a nice way to get endless, I guess. The Essence, I find, is pretty decent. Works well with a Tomb or an Imp that you need it on. But as a unit, it just seems pretty worthless to me. There is an Infinite that exists with it if you get the double Extinguish artifact, of course. I'm hardly ever looking for that, though. Maybe that's more consistent than I'm giving it credit for. But I don't know. I think in general, it's just not that valuable of a unit to me. It's technically not high cost to include in a deck because it cycles itself, but it also draws itself, so it's not like Ensnare where you just continue drawing through the deck. You do kind of redraw it, so it's like it doesn't... I don't know. It's a weird card, right? There are theoretical things that can make it really good, but every time I try to do something like that, I regret it. Like making it be a carry unit. Technically possible, but very hard to pull off. It's probably a unit that is, again, better than I'm getting credit for, but I hardly ever take it. I hardly ever make use of it. It's just not that good of a unit to me. Then finally we have Wicked Blaze. Here's one that also, similar to Subsuming Blade, has fallen for me. I put it in the B tier. It still is nice. It's not a bad card, but it's an overcosted card, you know. With the buffs to just burnout extension in general, with the buffs to even like Wicklash and whatnot, I just rarely find I need Wicked Blaze. It serves the same purpose as Molded for me, so what it is it's an overcosted Molded. That plus 10 damage is hardly ever relevant for me. Often I'm not reforming banner units anyway. I would just be reforming like a token, a tomb, or a imp, or even something like a Titan Sentry, which doesn't benefit from the extra damage. So it is an overcosted targeted reform, which still means it's okay. It's still okay, but I'm not really adding it to too many decks these days. It's more of when I add this card, it's kind of a desperation move, honestly. Like I would rarely add this in a primitive mold deck unless I am hard committed to rapid reform. But you know, again, it still is at the end of the day targeted reform, which is really nice to have in most decks. So it's a great, like, you know, you can Ember upgrade it to make it less awkward to play. You can Permafrost it. You can hold it over. These are all nice things to do with it. It is a card you can build around. You know, you can build around Wicked Blaze and make it be your win condition still. It's just... I don't like when I do... Let's put it this way. When I do a rapid reform deck, unless I have some serious burnout extension support, that run's going to take me an hour and 30 to do. And it's going to be like high stress. It's not going to be easy. That's just how they are. So I don't know. It's probably... I could be convinced that this one's better too. This could just be a playstyle thing. I think it just takes so much brain power now to count your burnout timers and get them to work for Divinity. It's not impossible. And it's probably something that can be consistent, even, I would say, but it's just so big brain. It's one of the highest skill ceiling things, high effort things you can do in the game. So if you're just looking for a nice casual run, you're not going in trying to make that be the plan. Because Paraffin Enforcer is just so much easier to pull off, you know. Or even something dumb like Hallowed Halls Holdover, stuff like that. So that's going to do it for this. That wraps up all the incoming drafts. We're going to move on to the rares next. I kind of already gave my thoughts on Melting Remnant, but as you can see here, it's a pretty good pool. And honestly, everything from B tier on up, I would consider pretty good cards. Both S tier cards are very good. I could probably argue God tier for them, but I'll leave them as S here. I could argue God tier for Crushing, maybe not Engulfed. And the A tier is the most interesting here, because it's like, these are cards that I would never have said were good pre-DLC, and they're only really good because of happenstance, right? In a vacuum, I think these cards are not good. But yeah, they're, like I said, with 1, 2, is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 even? Apparently I can't count. 8 cards in the B tier or up. 8 of the 12 cards, you are more than likely to be able to add something to your deck that's pretty takeable. And I've lost my music, so maybe that's a cue that the video should end now. Let me know your thoughts. Always love to hear it. Much love to everybody. And always, as always, thanks for watching. And until next time, peace.